Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission's regular meeting for March 24th, 2025. This time we'll move to roll call. Commissioner Britton.
Commissioner Bott.
Here.
Commissioner Britton, here. Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Frazier.
Here.
Commissioner Knable.
Here.
Commissioner Stevens.
Here.
Commissioner Woodman.
Here.
Thank you. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. Unless there's a motion to amend, I would look for approval.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve from Commissioner Stevens. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Fisher. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries 7-0. Item 4 tonight is open forum. This is a chance for anyone who's in the audience tonight to speak to the commission on something that is not on the agenda tonight. There are public hearings on the zoning code update and Leafline labs. And so if there's something that you would like to speak to the commission about that is not one of those two things, we will open forum. Seeing none, we will close open forum. Item 5 is chair's explanation of the hearing process. The Planning Commission is a volunteer advisory group to the City Council. One of the commission's functions is to hold public hearings and make recommendations on land use and zoning matters. The purpose of these public hearings is to provide an opportunity for each applicant and citizens to present information, ask questions, and express opinions. Since these proceedings are televised and recorded for the public record, anyone wishing to speak must step up to the podium and give their name and address before addressing the commission. Staff reports are prepared and provided to the applicant and Planning Commission in advance of the meeting. The first step in the hearing will be for staff to present a summary of the report. The applicant will then have the opportunity to briefly explain the proposal and provide additional information or comment. Anyone wanting to speak in favor or against the proposal will then be heard. Upon completion of the testimony, the hearing will be closed to public comment. The Planning Commission will then discuss and act on the matter. 2 complete agenda packets are available for viewing on the back table. Please do not remove those items. The City Council will act on these items at their meeting on Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, which starts at 7 p.m. With that, we will move to item 6. 6A is the zoning code update case TA 2025-009 with Max presenting.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As you're all aware, the zoning code had a major update in 2022. As the code is still relatively new from this update, there are changes that should be made when appropriate to keep the code modern and consistent. First, we'll go over some minor changes, and then we'll get into some more in-depth changes to the code. The first amendment we would like to implement would be to remove the Planning Commission action requirements for environmental documents, EIS, EAWs, AUARS. The state does not require Planning Commission to review these, and Council is the responsible governing unit for these reviews and processes. This lessens the time and coordination needed for the review process. Another change would be to remove the fee table. For convenience of updating year to year, it is not required to have, we're not required to have the fee table in the code itself. However, fees are still required to be approved by a governing body. This would eliminate an extra area to maintain year to year. The fee schedule would still continue to be published on the city's website and updated. We want a partial restructure in the accessory structure section of the code to consolidate language regarding maximum square footage of primary garages. Right now, this language is separate from the main maximum area requirements for accessory structures in the same section. This change would make it easier for the public to understand setback requirements. An amendment to the R4 residential district language would change the purpose statement to read more accurately with our definitions. Currently, the purpose statement refers to 2-family dwellings, but we do not have a definition in the code for 2-family dwellings, as it is under an attached single-family definition. This would incorporate other dwelling types described as in attached single-family, such as multifamily. Clarifications are added for gas station canopies to require Class 1 materials. This would make the architectural language consistent with the requirements for principal structure use on commercial lots. This would add consistency with the standards Cottage Grove has for gas station development. An additional provision was added to allow gas pumps to include one parking space to count towards the minimum required parking for gas stations, as the canopy takes up quite a bit of area of their lot. Clarification language was added for parking requirements at libraries. This was added to the standards for community centers, commercial facilities, and museums. It will now have its own called-out parking requirement. And then there are several grammar and formatting errors throughout the code to be corrected. Just as a reminder, sign code was removed last year from the zoning code. No action needs to be taken on the items related to sign code. However, we still want to inform you of any changes or updates to this code. We're adding clarifying language to allow businesses and shopping complexes to have both a shared and individual monument sign. There are also some grammar corrections in the sign code as well. Clarification will be added to differentiate the maximum allowable square footage between single-family attached and single-family detached uses in the R4 residential district. The current language for accessory structures in R4 states that the maximum square footage for accessory structures is 500 square feet per unit, which matches the maximum square footage allowed for higher density residentials such as R5 and R6. R4 does allow for single-family attached and single-family detached dwellings. This change would add the 1,000 square feet for the single-family detached, which would match closer to R3. This change would honor the intent for the R4 district as a transitional density zone between those two, or between the higher densities and lower densities residential zones. We have a few developments that have been approved that do incorporate both a multifamily and a single family, such as the Hinton Woods on screen. Let's see. Another change, we would move setback language regarding corner lot setbacks from the architectural standards section to the standard setbacks with the rest of the setbacks in that section. This would also just kind of keep everything neat for setbacks. I'll hand it off to Sam for the remainder.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I will continue on talking about our off-street parking on corner lots. This would be properties that are on a corner and the principal structure faces one street while the garage or drive access comes off of a different street. It's been difficult to enforce the provision in our code that the driveway must be paved because these drives are technically behind the principal structure where they according to the code, drives behind a principal structure could be gravel surfaced. So this proposed amendment would just clarify that if an accessory building, driveway, or parking area is coming off of an adjacent street, it also must be paved with bituminous or similar materials. We are also proposing to remove the requirement for street trees on each residential lot and instead require a front yard tree for each residence. As lots are getting narrower, the area to plant the boulevard tree decreases, as does the area available to avoid public utilities and for snow storage. Each boulevard tree that is planted also comes at a cost for the city to maintain. Planting a front yard tree will maintain the community's aesthetic and will ensure that the trees are still planted in the community. Types of trees planted would be complementary to the lot sizes, with smaller lots receiving smaller stature and smaller canopy trees. The images on the screen show two neighborhoods in Cottage Grove. Timber Ridge with boulevard trees, and Mississippi Dunes Estates with no boulevard trees. And you can see that both images do show a tree-lined street. It's also recommended that when calculating tree and shrub requirements, we use the disturbed site area instead of the entire site area. When calculating these requirements for projects on sites with existing development, using the entire site area to calculate tree and shrub planting requirements can result in a number of plantings that far exceeds the number that are being removed. Example of this is at the Park High School, where the impacted lot area with their addition was relatively small compared to the lot size of their property. When calculating requirements on vacant lots, it's recommended that we not take into account the undisturbed site area. Taking out that area ensures that vegetation removed during site development is replaced. An example of that was on the Quick Trip site that we saw last month, where we used landscape calculations just for the disturbed area of their site. With all of that, the recommendation to approve the amendments to City Code Title 11, recommend to the City Council, is on the screen, and we will stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Stevens?
I guess starting with the last one, the tree only being required for the disturbed area. I think that makes a ton of sense for developers. Have we been giving a lot of variances for that in general? Like, has that been happening a lot where only a portion is disturbed?
Sure. Being new, I'll toss it over.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Stevens, we've generally tried to find a way to make it applicable to the project at hand, right? When we have just an addition or only disturbing a small area of the site, we've evaluated our landscape code to generally use that calculation instead of using the entire site when they're not disturbing the entire site. So this has been our standard practice. We want it to be very clear in the code.
Okay, that's kind of what I figured. My question is just in some sense so it makes sense on the developer side, on the environmental side, it's kind of a nice blanket for making up for the loss of some trees, right? Like over time, maybe before we had a tree ordinance, but if you weren't enforcing it that way anyways, just doesn't really make sense, so.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner Stevens, I'll also add that we do have a maximum impervious standard and a minimum open space that's required as well, right, for project sites. So even if we're doing a minor addition, we're still making sure that that green space or open space is maintained on the site just the same.
And then also about the trees. So I think it's awesome to take them out of the boulevard. With them coming out of the boulevard, so that requirement's removed. What about when you have like a park or something else adjacent to the boulevard? Then are we like reducing the amount of trees overall that will be required with that change? By no longer requiring them like every 3 feet in the boulevard, right? Now it's just per lot, and if you're taking away lots and having a park. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Stevens, I think it does. So we're specifically talking about the boulevard trees for an individual lot, which was our standard. We've always had a boulevard tree for each new home lot. We're adjusting that to say no boulevard tree in the right-of-way, front yard tree in the front yard. Open space and common lot landscaping is calculated a little bit differently in residential projects. So those will still be permitted and required, generally speaking. However, on individual residential lots, we're adjusting to remove those street trees or boulevard trees. Did I catch your question?
I think that makes sense. I'm just kind of thinking like in a development, the boulevard, right? You usually have your sidewalk runs all the way along, whether there's a park or a lot. And so I guess my thought is just maybe there's going to be a few less trees required because that boulevard requirement is gone, but the open space requirement stays the same.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. That was my only question. 2 questions.
Any further questions for staff? Commissioner Bott?
So regarding the first item, removal of planning commission review, is it just the review part, or is it that we won't be hearing any such applications for permits? Are we just not being asked to review the documents? Or if there any application comes which would involve certain environmental, let's say, consequences, then the permit or the application doesn't come to us with those documents? That is the part I couldn't understand.
So, Commissioner Botch, Mr. Chair, I'll try to answer my best. So with those, the EAW, EAS, AUARs, so state statute does not require the planning commission to review those or make a decision on those. You are not making a decision on those items when currently if one were to come to you. As the planning commission, you are very much welcome to participate in that process where the council is the regulatory government unit. And they are the ones, making the decision and everything. Removing the formal, having the applicant come to the planning commission meeting, present this to all of you, is just taking one meeting step out of the process that is just another kind of timeline thing in a very long timeline that is required by these applicants.
Just a quick follow-up. So what kind of applications are these? What kind of permit applications would those be?
So, Commissioner Bott, Mr. Chair, these are, so environmental assessment worksheets, environmental impact statements, and the AUAR, which I haven't, I haven't learned what that one means yet, my apologies. And so those are the lengthy, currently our mining site is undergoing an environmental impact statement right now and study and everything. So those large, long documents are what is not going to need to come to the planning commission for your review and approval or recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
So Sam, I guess, just to clarify in the EIS, EAW, AUARs, I forgot what AUAR means too, but, so anytime there is like a project that's gonna be proposed, so a new development, the mining, site, there is a determination about whether there is enough potential impact on the land and in the surrounding environment where they may have to undergo one of these assessments, correct?
Correct.
All right, and so then if there was a determination that one of these was appropriate, then they'd have to go through that process, and then part of the process is come present this to the planning commission where there then is a public hearing on it, correct? As it stands now.
Correct.
Okay, and so then, as it stands now, they still then go to city council, do that all over again, because city council is the responsible governing unit, and then city council makes the decision after a second public hearing, correct? All right, so this is just taking away one of the public hearings, allowing city council to have the public hearing and make the decision on those statements.
Right, and it's not taking, it's not required by statute, Mr. Chair, for the planning commission to have this, so we're not, doing anything that's out of bounds or anything.
But if we were hearing the underlying application, let's say for a new housing development where there was an EIS or an EAW, we would still get that information about what the findings were on that as part of the application that comes
Correct.
before us.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
I was
Mr. Fisher.
in that same vein, I guess, I think our biggest job here is to have public hearings and to let people speak about applications. And so I guess, if we aren't allowed to do that for certain applications, does that affect our ability to make recommendations? Like, the big one I think about is Mississippi Dunes, like, that's the big one that we've been through, and we've gone, a lot of us up here went through that process, and so we understand that. And I think that the public hearings were really valuable for us to look at the whole project and give recommendations on the whole thing. So I guess, is there a benefit to that being deleted from this? I mean, does city council, like the one, I think we were here for 3 hours, right, that one night? does city council sit that long and go through all of those too, or?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Fisher, so two things. These environmental documents are triggered by the size of a development, right? And so they dig into the potential impacts of a development from a variety of different environmental perspectives, and then they identify if mitigation efforts are required. Now, those mitigation efforts would be included then in a proposed planning application, right, would come before this group ahead of a council review and action, right? And so as a part of these environmental review documents, right, there are multiple different levels, for lack of a better way to put it. They would actually require several public hearings, so they require a public meeting, and then the council, as the RGU, would also hold that public meeting as well, right? So there's already two in the state statute process.
Okay, perfect. I think that's what I was looking for, was what is required. So, thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Commissioner Woodman.
Hi there. Quick question just on the, going back actually a little bit to the fuel pump, that being available as one of the required parking spaces. Is there any consideration for like EV parking / charging in that? Because I know it's very specifically written for fuel pump, which if you think about it, EVs sit there for a much longer time, and it might be an incentive for fuelers, that type of thing, to put in EV chargers if those were considered as one of the parking spaces that were required.
Commissioner Whitman, Mr. Chair, that was actually not a consideration as part of that. This really spawned out of the Quick Trip proposal where they were, their surface parking was technically under our requirements, but at the pumps, they were providing enough parking. If they were to be EV spaces, I would say we would definitely be looking at those as more of a longer-term space where, like mentioned in this, the fuel pumps are more of a quick turnover, as we all know.
All right, any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
And the city is the applicant, so we don't have an applicant, so let's go ahead and open public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against may step to the podium. State their name and address.
Hello. Bonnie Matter, 6649 Inskip Avenue South, Cottage Grove, Minnesota. A couple of things. I have two buckets. My first bucket is the question about why the Planning Commission would no longer be part of the EAW, EIS, and AUAR. I found it very helpful to be able to come and share or learn about some of these things. These are big deals. I mean, they impact our community, they impact our residents, and it's a way for the residents to find out about what's going on and learn more about it during that period, and then go before the city council. So I personally would feel better if the Planning Commission was also involved. The other concern I have about it is there'll be things where there will be a development and it will also involve the environmental piece of it, and I don't know how you can't not be involved in the environmental piece of it. It has to be figured out. I don't think they can go ahead and develop and then be doing, well, the EAW on the side. So those are my concerns. But that's really not why I'm here. But that is one, it was on my bucket. The reason I'm here is because of the environmental assessment worksheets and impact statements. The Minnesota Environmental Quality Board, it's called the EKQB, if you're not familiar with it, you probably are, provides very detailed instructions on the process for handling environmental documents such as the Environmental Assessment Worksheet, the Environmental Impact Statement, and an alternative urban area-wide review. And so I've provided the information where you can locate these documents so that you can look at them. My main concern for being here is I would like to see the city regulation updated to incorporate the Minnesota EQB instructions following the Minnesota statutes and rules provided. For example, the EQB has a distribution list as well as these statements that go beyond the property owners within 500 feet. The RGU shall promptly publish notice of the completion of an EAW by 1, publishing the notice in at least one newspaper of general circulation in the geographic area where the project is proposed, or 2, posting the notice on a website that has been designated as the official publication site for publication of proceedings, public notices, and summaries of a political subdivision in which the product is proposed. And C, within 5 days of the date of submission of the EAW to the EQB staff, the RGU shall provide a press release containing notice of the availability of the EAW for public review to at least one newspaper of general circulation within the area where the project is proposed. The press release shall include the name and location of the project, a brief description of the project, the location at which copies of the EIW are available for review, the date of the comment period expires, and the procedures for commenting. The RGU shall publish legal notice or advertisement of the availability of the EAW if the proposer requests and agrees to pay for the notice or advertisement. The notice or advertisement shall contain the information required in the press release. There is a very, very long distribution list in addition to those requirements for the RGU. The other thing that I would like to say is that hopefully the other governmental units, they just refer to governmental units in the distribution list. I would hope that at the very least, that would include the South Washington Watershed District and any adjacent cities that may be impacted. We haven't been real good about doing that, so that would be helpful if we let other cities know what we're doing. And I would appreciate the following. I'd appreciate a written response to the letter. I would like the updated regulation copy, and I would like inclusion of this letter and the city's response in the meeting minutes. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I'll take a copy of that letter if you'd like.
Yeah, got it. I have one from Max, so I'll bring it back later.
Thank you. Without objection, we'll make that part of the record of the meeting.
So that has, thank you.
All right, any further public comment? Seeing none, we will close public comment. Then I don't know who would like to take some of the concerns that were raised. I guess my first question, I think one of the big concerns was publishing any EIS, EAWs. I know just from doing this in the past, and Emily can correct me if I'm wrong, but when we do those, we do send them to the EQB to be published as part of their kind of publication that goes out.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we follow the state statute rules for any environmental document, EAW, EIS, EAUAR. A part of that is publishing it in the EQB Environmental Quality Board monitor. And there's certain timelines that we're required to meet to do those publications.
Okay. I think the other concern was, there was another concern about just timing of if these environmental assessments are going on. There's a planning document that's also kind of on a parallel track. If the planning, can the planning document be ahead of any environmental work that's going on, and does that make sense based on the fact that they kind of need to be working together? And
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, yes, sometimes they can be happening congruently, right? However, we wouldn't be able to act on a development proposal application, right? The official application until that environmental work is complete, for lack of a better way to put it, right? So they can run congruently, however, we would need those actions to line up appropriately.
And that's because as part of the recommendations and conditions of approval for any application on the planning side, we would need to know what the impact statement says or what the assessment says to include those as part of the conditions of approval.
Correct. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if there were mitigation efforts required as a result of that work or that environmental worksheet, EIS, whatever it is, those would be required to be included in those conditions.
Okay. All right. Any further questions, comments, discussion from commission? Commissioner Stevens.
On when you do an EIS or an EAW, do you have neighborhood meetings to discuss any of that as part of like a newer subdevelopment or anything like that? Because like Bonnie was saying, it's helpful for residents to come, they can ask questions, planning commission ask questions. Are there any other workshops that happen as part of the process that might help with that?
Yep, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Stevens, a public meeting is typically required as a part of those processes, right? So that applicant is holding a public meeting to which we invite the planning commission, sometimes other commissions if they, would hold an interest, right? And ensure that those folks have the opportunity to hear more about the project at the early stages, right? That helps them to be involved and informed.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mott.
So who conducts these impact surveys? I mean, what is the authority or competent body which would be conducting these impact surveys?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so typically the applicant, right, whether it's a developer, a builder who's proposing a project will hire a consultant to do the work. However, as the responsible governmental unit, we are required to review all of that work and ensure that it meets our standards. Typically, we do hire a consultant who is a professional in the field, whether it's specific to the impact to mussels in the Mississippi River, or ensuring we're protecting a bat or a bird, right? We review that work that comes from the consultant on the applicant side.
My second question is it automatically triggered, these impact surveys or assessments, or is it triggered during these public hearings or meetings?
An EAW, an EI, or an EIS is triggered by state statute for different levels or sizes of development. It's typically based on unit, the number of units in a residential development, or the square footage of a commercial or industrial project that triggers the need for this additional review.
And that is specified in the zoning code or no?
It's state statute.
It's state, okay, thank you.
Any further questions, comments, discussion from commission? Otherwise, I would look for someone to make a motion.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Commissioner Britton. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Woodman. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. Motion carries 7-0. Item 6B tonight is Leafline Labs, case CUP 2025-009, with Sam presenting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'll just, there we go. All right, Leafline Labs has applied for a conditional use permit to allow their operation on 97th Street South to be licensed as a medical cannabis combination business with the state of Minnesota. The property is approximately 21.84 acres, zoned I-1, general industry in the Cottage Grove Business Park. The property is currently used for the processing, manufacturing, and cultivation of medical cannabis, which was permitted as a conditional use in 2014 with amendments in 2020 and 2022. The 2022 CUP allowed for structure additions in 2 phases. Phase 1 was constructed, however, Phase 2 was not constructed and is not proposed as part of this CUP application tonight. In 2023, legislation passed in the state of Minnesota that created an adult use cannabis marketplace in the Office of Cannabis Management, or OCM. OCM will oversee and enforce Statute 342 and license cannabis businesses. In response to these changes, the city of Cottage Grove updated its ordinances for adult use cannabis in 2024. At the state level, the statute under which Leafline is currently operating will be repealed December 1st, 2025, to account for these state and local changes and to allow Leafline to operate as a medical cannabis combination business. A new conditional use permit must be applied for to ensure compliance with city and state statutes and rules. The applicant is not proposing any footprint changes or substantive changes to current operations. The biggest change will be that the cannabis products will be allocated to the medical and recreational marketplace. Any future building expansions or operational changes would require a separate planning application to the city. OCM has been tasked with rulemaking to establish final state regulations governing the adult use cannabis market. Draft rules have been prepared with expedited review enacted, and final adoption is anticipated very soon. Statute created 13 license types, one of which is the medical cannabis combination business. The deadline for businesses to apply for OCM consideration was March 14th, 2025. OCM is now reviewing these applications for compliance. After preliminary approval, the applicant will have 18 months to obtain local government approval for a signature to OCM. And during that 18 months after local government approval, OCM will conduct final inspections and pre-licensure measures and issue the license. In Cottage Grove, a licensee must also register with the city before commencing operations. As one of only 2 medical cannabis producers in the state, the applicant does not foresee any issues obtaining their state licensure. City Code Title 11418 contains performance standards for cannabis uses. One of these is a minimum structure setback of 300 feet. Since the structure was constructed prior to the 2024 adoption of standards, the building is considered an existing nonconformity. Landscaped or screened buffers are also required on site. The site is very well screened from the north, south, and east sides, with trees and shrubs planted northwest of the building during the 2022 expansion. In 2022, it was determined there is not enough room on the west side outside of a utility easement for screening to be planted. With no footprint changes and no additional landscaping or screening needs to be installed here. A security plan must be submitted to the city's Director of Public Safety. The state's draft cannabis rules include very strict provisions for security at cannabis businesses. The applicant provided a summary of their security plan to staff today. Their security includes electronic video surveillance, multiple levels of alarms, key card entry, and runs on an auxiliary power source to ensure operation during power outages. Their equipment is inspected at least once every 30 days, and any revisions required by OCM once final rules are adopted will be implemented by the applicant. State statutes allow local governments to establish buffers from cannabis businesses to other land uses. These buffers are the maximum allowed by state statute, and the property exceeds all of the required buffers from schools, daycares, residential treatment facilities, and attractions in public parks regularly used by minors. The operation also complies with all required buffers from residential districts and uses for manufacturing, outdoor, and indoor cultivation. City staff have received multiple odor complaints related to the facility since 2022. The 2014 CUP required odor monitoring from 3 locations, and these locations were not changed during the 2020 or 2022 CUP processes. Leafline continues to take nasal ranger readings on a regular basis as required. However, their readings submitted to the city indicate no odors are present. The applicant hired Byers Scientific to analyze odor mitigation equipment and processes on site February of 2025. They toured the entire facility and identified mitigation measures that could be taken immediately and mitigation measures that could be done in the future. Leafline plans to do all immediate mitigation measures, including establishing an odor task force to respond to complaints. The long-term mitigation measures will be done in the future as funding and odor lead time allows. There are conditions included in your packet tonight related to odor mitigation. Condition number 6 states that the dilution to threshold, or DT measure, shall not exceed 7 at the property lines. A 7 is scientifically considered to be an ambient odor level that could sometimes be considered a nuisance. This means that cannabis smells still may be present around the facility in Cottage Grove. The measurement is calculated using the nasal ranger and means that the odor needs to be diluted 7 times with odor-free air before it is no longer detectable. A recommendation has been included this evening to rescind the 2022 resolution and recommend approval of the CUP. Prepared condition number 5 should be modified to remove the first sentence, which conflicts with proposed condition number 6. Condition number 6 requires that more scientific dilution to threshold measurement represent and requires more scientific measurements. So this evening, representative from Leafline and Buyer Scientific are also available for questions. And for that, I will stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Britton?
You mentioned that level 7 was it smells. And this was not to exceed 7, but 7 smells. So why wouldn't we have something lower than where it actually smells?
Commissioner Britton, Mr. Chair, the measurement of 7 is commonly used in the scientific measurement where other industries, even in this area, have used that measurement of 7, which is considered to be, like I mentioned, you can still smell it, but it is not considered to be harmful to health effects, things like that. So the measurement of 7 is giving kind of an idea of there will still be smells present and is much like other industries in the area, and they will be required to ensure to measure that.
Okay. That's a concern for me.
Commissioner Britton, if I may. Unfortunately, I've become kind of an expert on smell because one of the other cities I represent has a rendering plant and it can't seem to stop smelling. So we use this company that is known, I would say nationwide, but it's actually around the world, as an expert in this kind of technology. And so they're the ones that developed the nasal ranger. They are scientific experts in this field, and they have determined, based on a very objective analysis, that is withstood the Federal Court of Appeals scrutiny on being constitutional as an objective measurement for odor. So I strongly support the scientific methodology that stands behind it because we have experts that can testify to it, which is why I suggest we keep 7.
Well, I agree that having a scientific method for measuring is extremely important and valid. What my question is that the measurement is set to the point where it still smells. So if we're measuring it and saying this still smells but it's okay, that's what confuses me, is why we're not setting it to the point where the smell for whatever product is contained within the building. So I guess that's what I'm looking for. Why are we picking 7? I agree with the scientific method in setting a level, but it sounds like it should be 6. If I can smell it at 7, I don't want to smell it.
Yep, Your Honor and members of the commission, I think every property has an odor, and sometimes it's the smell of grass. Sometimes there are properties that, we have a bread shop in town that smells wonderful, but it still has an odor, and at some point it becomes subjective. So everybody's sense of smell is different. Not every person, and I'm sure Leafline has discovered this, can be a nasal ranger technology user because their sense of smell is too sensitive. I was crossed off the list because my nose is too sensitive. So there needs to be an objective measurement, and it will smell. Things just do. And so we can't keep all sound completely quiet. We can't keep all smell completely contained, but there becomes a level of nuisance that we have to measure it by. So that's the part that exceeds where we can then say, now you have to address it. But we have to have a threshold. We can't be at 0 because it's not reasonable and it's not realistic.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for staff?
I have a quick one.
Commissioner Stevens?
I'm just curious about that level 7 and the fact that people were complaining about the smell, but their nasal rangers said there was no smell. What is that about? Wouldn't it be a 7 on the nasal ranger?
Yep, Your Honor and members of the commission, although we didn't have this 7 level, obviously, we're putting it in this particular condition. We didn't know enough about the nasal ranger in the 2014 conditional use permit. We didn't know enough about odor, frankly, as we do today. And so now we know there can be an objective test. We also know these nasal rangers have to be calibrated. We know that the operators have to be certified. We know so much more about the technology that we know the questions to ask. So it's very possible that they were producing these results at, at places where it wouldn't have mattered or wouldn't have measured the appropriate level of odor, or by maybe the machine had not been tested or calibrated lately. We didn't ask for all of the backup. We just took their reports at face value. Now we know. Now we're putting a lot better odor mitigation conditions. There will be an odor mitigation plan that will have to be approved by the city. So we're getting smarter about it as we go.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Knable?
I had a non-smell question. In underperformance standards about the hours of operation of retail sales of cannabis, all that, are Leafline, are they selling cannabis at other location? I'm just wondering why that's in there.
Commissioner Knable, Mr. Chair, Leafline is not retail selling their products on site, and they are not allowed to sell retail products on site in the industrial district.
So then under G for performance, that's just a part of the CBD, THC law that we have?
Correct.
Okay. Sorry, it just mentioned retail sales and all that. I was just kind of curious.
Commissioner Bob?
My question is actually related. So while presenting, you indicated that this application is for a transition from an existing license to a different kind of license, right? And the new license is this combination business license. What's the existing license again?
Commissioner Bott, Mr. Chair, their existing license is just as a medical cannabis. In our ordinance at the time, around 2014, it was considered like pharmaceutical manufacturing. This medical cannabis combination license, it has been brought about by the legislature, the new statutes, the new license types that are required to be permitted in all municipalities across the state. So there really is no, like I mentioned in the report, no change to what they propose to do except allocate products to the recreational market, and they need to be licensed as the medical cannabis combination business with the state.
I see. So as of today, all the product is going for pharmaceutical application, but in the future, it's going to go for recreational also.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions? Commissioner Woodman?
I noticed on the, and this goes back to the original plan, again, going back to odor, where the monitoring locations are, it shows that to the west of the building is where they have the 2 downwind sensors, and Cottage Grove, our dominant winds are out of the northwest generally and follow down the river, so it feels like that's somewhat inverse of downwind. I'm just wondering if that's based on the physical location or if we're maybe not sampling where we should be, knowing that the wind is most likely pushing it down towards Anderson in that area.
Commissioner Woodman, Mr. Chair, I would definitely say in that presentation, though, those monitoring stations were from 2014. So you will notice that they were up against the buildings themselves. In our conditions that we have proposed for you tonight, we propose that they are required to monitor from 3 property lines to get them out away from the structures, property lines, odors. We don't want those at the property lines. So instead of being right up against the building in those locations, that is one thing that is changing, if, as recommended.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. The applicant would like to approach and add anything additional.
I do have just a bit of information about our company, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you. Yes.
Might have gotten some extra. Or was this, did you?
Oh, too many.
I think we got an extra copy too.
Thank you.
Yep.
One sec, lost my page. Okay. All right. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. My name is Tiffany Newbern Johnson, and I serve as Director of Government Affairs for Leafline Labs and Green Thumb Industries, which also owns and operates the Rise dispensaries located throughout Minnesota. I'm joined today by Deke Fisher, our General Manager of Production, who will be able to answer any specific questions about our manufacturing and production facility. Also here is Mark Byers from Buyer Scientific, who will be able to answer questions about what's included in your packet, his recommendations, and the proposal that they've put forth for some of the products that we are procuring. Leafline has proudly called Cottage Grove home since 2015 and is one of only 2 licensed medical cannabis companies authorized by the state to cultivate, manufacture, and dispense medical cannabis. Over the past decade, Leafline has invested tens of millions of dollars into building out our cultivation and manufacturing operations right here in Cottage Grove, ensuring that safe, high-quality cannabis products reach medical cannabis patients across our 8 medical dispensaries statewide. We currently employ over 240 Minnesotans in union-represented positions, including over 70 employees at our Cottage Grove cultivation and manufacturing facility. I included in your packet, there is one small typo, and I apologize, but we started off with just about 10 employees. So we grew from 10 to over 240 at this point. We proudly serve over 52,000 Minnesotan medical patients statewide, many of whom are minors who rely on specialized medical-grade cannabis products, such as tinctures, topicals, and pill capsules for relief. As required by law, Leafline submitted its application for a medical cannabis combination business license to operate under the new adult use program on February 21st, and we have already received positive feedback from the Office of Cannabis Management on its contents. We are required to apply for a new license under the new law in order to maintain our current operations and continue serving Minnesota's medical community. We do remain committed to full compliance with all applicable state laws and regulations, and we are aware that the odors from our cultivation and manufacturing operations have been detected at the community, and we want to be clear that we take those concerns very seriously. Leafline has demonstrated a longstanding commitment to being a good neighbor and minimizing odor and traffic at our facility, responding to any community complaints and proactively complying with the city's requirements. We submitted an approved odor control monitoring protocol and have a trained employee taking daily odor readings using the nasal ranger as required by the city. And to further strengthen our odor mitigation commitments, we voluntarily retained Buyer Scientific, an independent odor mitigation expert, to conduct a comprehensive inspection and analysis of our facility. On February 19th, 2025, Buyer conducted an on-site evaluation of our facility and identified both immediate and long-term mitigation steps. Following the report, we took immediate action to establish an internal odor task force that is responsible for inspecting all engineering controls and exhausts, and immediately investigating and addressing any sources of odor upon notice of a complaint, of a community complaint. We took the additional immediate step to inspect all exhaust and air handling units to ensure they are properly installed and operating under the correct settings, including turning off the economizer mode for some of our rooftop units and taking the sanitation room exhaust out of service, which had been identified by buyer as one of the sources of odor. We also purchased a meteorological station to better assess the source of exterior odor upon a community complaint. We are committed to taking the additional steps to mitigate sources of odor and are working with Buyer Scientific to source the necessary products and components. We are in the process of procuring several molecular filtration units that will be installed to capture and remove odor, as well as procuring Buyer's patented waterless vapor phase odor control unit. These specialized systems are custom-built with extended lead times due to supply chain constraints and the proprietary nature of the technology. The capital investment exceeds $125,000 with ongoing maintenance and operating costs of more than $100,000. These are extraordinary commitments, but ones that Leafline is willing to make to uphold our responsibility under the city's ordinance and remain a trusted business in the community. We have reviewed the proposed requirements for an odor mitigation and maintenance plan and may have questions about certain points, and we do look forward to meeting with the city staff to discuss such points and working with them in the future. Odor mitigation is not a one-time fix. It is an ongoing effort that requires monitoring, adjustment, and partnership. We are committed to this process. We remain steadfast in our commitments to our employees, patients, and the city of Cottage Grove, and we will continue working closely with the city to address any odor complaints and mitigate the source of odor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and for considering the critical role that Leafline has played in supporting the medical patients across the state and our community.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Bob?
Who are there in this odor mitigation task force? What is the composition of this task force?
It includes some of our production employees, including our general manager of production, Deke Fisher. Deke, I don't know if you want to step up and give the additional persons.
Thank you. The odor task force is made up of a combination of hourly employees and leadership employees. And basically what it is to identify, as simple as, did we smell odor when we came to work today? We start that off with an 8:15 meeting in the morning. It's one of our agenda items when we talk about safety and quality. From there, if any odor is detected in the parking lot, we automatically go and investigate. The investigation includes as simple as, hey, let's check all of our HVAC, our building controls, mechanical controls in the system. Are they all functioning as normal? Do we have any doors ajar or breached or anything like that where we might have odor coming through the operation? And we also make note then of the meteorological outside, and we also take notes as to what part of the process is operating at that point of the day. Are we in the middle of harvest? Are we transporting product from one room to the next? So it's a very kind of an immediate check all of the things that we can control, monitor all the things that we have identified through the kind of the buyer's report and or previous known, I'll call it odor creators previously, but it's really about capturing notes so we can kind of further understand what's happening and what might be contributing to the odor.
Any further questions for the applicant? Commissioner Fisher?
Oh, sorry. I was just curious if you are planning or anticipating an uptick in production when you're able to provide for recreational use as well as medical. I mean, I know it sounds like I appreciate your presentation. Thank you for kind of explaining, the people that you serve and your numbers. But are you expecting some pretty major growth, or do you have any insight into that?
The answer is yes. I think when you look at the overall facility, we talked a little bit about footprint. Nothing's going to change from the outside building. But changing the product mix from a demand standpoint as to what that looks like. We have some general information as to what we can experience in other, I'll call it states, as they've gone to EU. But a lot of it's some of changing some sizes, changing some of the products to a different size, quantity, and so on. But the full intent is to convert the biomass that we have into whatever that saleable mix is going to look like. I'll be honest, I can't forecast what the mix is gonna be. I think we're waiting from the standpoint of what are the final regulations gonna be from the state. We are kind of a little bit of in a holding pattern to understand what that final license is going to be, and then understanding what that forecasted demand is going to be. So it's a little gray right now, but the answer is we would try to maximize our canopy.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stevens.
I just wanted to clarify, at the end of your letter statement, you said that there's probably going to be some questions on what I think is in our packet. Did I understand that correctly? Like,
No. So Bayard Scientific created a recommendation, which we included in the packet. So
Yep.
if there's any questions about the specific recommendations, the science behind it, just wanted to let you all know that he was here to
okay, I
answer those. Yeah.
completely heard that wrong. All right, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, thank you both.
I do have one
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Commissioner Bob.
So you talked about the biomass. Are there any regulations on how much of a biomass or how much can you cultivate? Does that define your capacity to produce certain number of, let's say, production units, for the lack of a better word?
So I can answer it. So yeah, the state has a limitation in law as to how much we can manufacture and produce. They also include a canopy cap that we cannot go above. So there are limitations in place set by law.
And one other question is, you mentioned about purchasing a meteorological station. Where is this meteorological station? Is it in the same site or outside?
You talking about odor mitigation or
The meteorological.
It's the meteorological station that you...
it's outside?
It's outside?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Britton?
You mentioned that the amount of recreational that you might produce would be, it sounded like determined by supply and demand, something along those lines. Would that negatively impact the amount of medical product that you guys are currently, since there's only 2 of you in the state?
So the state also placed a restriction on that. So right now, in the law, there is a ratio as to how much we can output for adult use. That ratio is dependent on how much we sell in medical. So there is a limit to how much we can actually produce for adult use, if that is also a concern.
So it won't take over and we no longer have a medical supply? Because there's that
No,
balance in the rules.
There is. There's actually a requirement that we must continue selling medical, which we would do anyway, but that's in there.
Thank you.
All right, last call. Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, do you all want to?
No, I don't think we have any more questions, so thank you.
Sorry. Are you from Bioscientific? Okay. So,
Why don't you go ahead and step up? Commissioner Bob.
so were your recommendations based on the odor level that we talked about, 7 or below 7 or above 7? So the recommendations that you put in, was it based on that or some other metric?
No, those are really 2 different things. I'll address a few things. First, let me just tell you who I am real quick. My name is Mark Byers. I'm the owner of Byers Scientific. We're in the industrial odor mitigation space, so that includes solid waste and other. We work with ExxonMobil, for example. We just have a particular expertise in the cannabis space. If you associate a particular animal with cannabis, we all know skunk. We were the first entity in the world to identify why that is. I have 2 PhD air chemists. They're teaching professors. They're also shareholders. I made them shareholders for a reason. We set out to understand the science because the literature, the science, everyone said cannabis odor is from terpenes. Terpenes are about 99% of the plant in reality, but that's not how odor works. And it's actually a sulfur. It's a thiol for any chemists, but it's a sulfur. And so that informs a lot of what we do. Ms. Land nailed it. The 7D over T, that's not arbitrary, but also it doesn't, there's a lot of history behind detection over threshold. And to your concern of a 7, I'll tell you from what I do, I'll take 7 D over T all day long if that's what my threshold is, because we can, that's not, we work in Santa Barbara County, California, for instance, which is the largest concentration of cannabis cultivation in the United States. We're talking about millions of square feet. We measure it in acres. We don't even measure it in square feet. It's so much. And we have receptors. We'd say sensitive receptors within 100 feet of a facility. And 7 D over T is our threshold there. And we're successful. So that said, that's an experience on the periphery. That really has nothing to do with how we go in and assess a building. So the first thing we do is, and you know, like any business, we've evolved our science as we become more understanding. This is a very niche industry, of course. And so we want to be data-driven, exclusively data-driven. We never want to be the fox guarding the hen house. So we sit next to our client, not across from them, and we show them what we discovered. And so every building, this building, including a cultivation space, they're living, sort of breathing animals almost. And so we just go in, and initially we just want to understand, how does it work? How does it breathe? What is it? How does it behave? And that's simply going around and really understanding where the air cooling units are, what does air handling look like, where are the egress points, things like this. Then it does get very data and very science driven. We use gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. We take a lot of samples. We have our own lab, but we actually sub out all of our results to a third-party lab just for intellectual honesty. They're delivering the results. Then we sit down with the results and we go, this is what we see that your building is doing. Some of it's intuitive, sometimes some of it's counterintuitive. I will say this is a fairly light lift. I don't want to get over my ski tips here, but this building doesn't have a lot of egress points, but it has a lot of capacity for recirculation. So we rely on a couple of different techniques. At the end of the day, activated carbon is the single most efficient source of adsorbing odors. We live in the physical world, so as you know, nothing ever goes away. People think it just goes away. It doesn't. We can't make mass disappear. What we can do is trap it essentially indefinitely in carbon, activated carbon, a very specific carbon substrate, a very specific size that our science evolved to understand. We've actually instructed the largest carbon companies in the world, actually the right carbon that they should be using for cannabis. And then, so that's a physical reaction called adsorption, if anyone wants to wonk out. We also developed what we know is pretty much the rate that a canopy exhausts. We were the first in the world to develop what we call the gas phase emission rate. And so that instructs how many circulations we want to get internally. So theoretically, if I had a box in here and I turned it on, at some point, every bit of air in here would have to go through that box, theoretically. Now, if we size that up and deploy those properly, now we're going to move air through carbon and sequester, essentially, in that carbon, any of the odorous gases, right? We know that they're going to, you know, we can't stay ahead of everything because there's diminishing marginal return. We take up all the space with equipment, right? And so we built a model or a system of scrubbing, basically, in select areas in their particular facility. And then actually 2 of the larger units that we've ever done will go on their exhaust hoods. They're not hoods, I misspoke. They're exhaust points. And then I have a patent on a system to essentially take a odor neutralizer, any liquid, really any liquid, and put it into its vapor state. That will be on the roof. So that is a last line of defense, for instance. Sometimes we would say belt and suspenders. To me, that implies redundancy. This isn't redundancy. This is a third polishing step that is necessary. But the combination of all that, well, I say this all the time, it sounds hokey maybe, but my last name is on the company, and that's not because of ego, maybe a little bit, no. No, it's that, it's not Acme Scientific, so if we fail, my name's on it, and we don't grow our business, and I've been doing this since 2014. We work with the largest cannabis companies in the world, we're in the Middle East, and we don't achieve that without being successful. So, that's a long answer to your 7D/T or whatever it was, but.
One quick follow-up question.
After all that, a fun, no, I'm kidding.
So what's do you have a set pattern for recycling or scrubbing the activated carbon? Or do you replace your carbon at a certain period of point? Is it automatic or how do you do it? Or do you
That's
do?
a really good question, yeah. So, wow, I get too long-winded. Yes, we will go in. What we'll initially do is a somewhat arbitrary, at about 6 months, we'll take carbon samples. And we'll take a nice mixture of them. Those go to a lab. The lab does a butane life assessment and a humidity assessment. And that'll basically spit out what the remaining active life is. But that's one data point, so that doesn't tell us a lot. It just gives us an idea. And then in another, well, it's part art, part science. Probably within about 4 more months, so about 10 months, we'll take another set of samples. Now we'll start to get a plot. But if we're starting to experience anything, then we'll know maybe we're going through carbon a little quicker than we anticipated. But that's a whole program, and that's something that the applicant has agreed to is it's a whole service and maintenance plan. We will take over everything. We'll ensure that the carbon is constantly replaced. But again, it's data-driven. We're not doing a wet finger in the air. We see what the data is telling us.
All right, any further questions? Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks.
All right, at this time, we will open public hearing on the application. Anyone wishing to speak for or against the application can step to the podium.
Bonnie Matter, 6649 Inskip Avenue South, Cottage Grove. What I would like to know is, will this change have any impact as far as increased water usage, increased energy usage, or increased wastewater? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions for public hearing? Seeing none, we will close public hearing on the application. I don't know if applicant wants to take that or if staff. I know staff during presentation, there was comments about this is not going to change footprint. So I'm assuming the answer to Ms. Matter's concern is no, it's not going to, but.
Mr. I would have the applicant speak to that probably if they are inclined. 1 second.
And I guess I'll just say while go ahead. If you have an answer for us, and I was just gonna say, if you don't know, because this is a issue that's gonna be decided based on what the business looks like going forward, then that's the answer.
Yeah, the answer is yes, you're pretty close. It'll depend upon supply and demand from that standpoint. I think the other part to kind of think about is all of the process is kind of a closed cell. So it's constantly recirculating moisture and everything within the room. So it's a really low water footprint, I would say, overall in the entire process. So we aren't evaporating anything out to outside atmosphere. It's all being contained inside. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further comments, discussion by commission? Seeing none, then I would look for a motion.
I will make the motion. I'll make a motion that the city council rescinds the previous resolution noted and approves the conditional use permit, subject to the stipulations in the staff report, and also including the condition number 5 that is noticed, or that's noted here, that the one word needs to be changed.
and removing the first sentence.
Correct.
All right, I've got a motion to rescind the prior resolution, approve a new conditional use permit, subject to the conditions in the staff report with the noted amendment. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Knable. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. 0. Motion carries 7-0. Item 7 tonight is presentations, and we are going to get a presentation on the 2025 housing needs analysis.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Technology. Love it. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. It's my pleasure to be here this evening. I'm Mary Bougeot with Maxfield Research, and our firm conducted the housing needs analysis for the city of Cottage Grove. So I was told tonight that I had about 10 to 15 minutes to present the study, so I endeavored to keep very close to that. And I know that there's a lot of information, and I know you have the full study in your packets. It's a rather lengthy study with a lot of data, but I'm going to try and just highlight some of the things that we identified in the analysis for you tonight. And then, of course, I'll take questions. So a little bit about the objective. So we were asked to provide an analysis of housing needs for the city. We've done a number of these. We actually started doing them, and we've evolved our methodology and our analysis since the time we started, but we first did one for the city of Brooklyn Center in 1985. And we've kind of continued to do them for both cities, counties, larger areas. The approach was generally to provide a guide and framework to consider key housing priorities and current housing gaps. And the deliverables were essentially short and long-term housing needs, and then recommendations to guide future housing development. So our data collection, actually, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. So our data collection was the second and third quarters of 2024. We did deliver a draft in October, and of course, the general presentation is now. So we identified a primary market area from which essentially 70% of the demand for housing in that market area would be generated. And that includes the cities of Cottage Grove, Woodbury, Newport, St. Paul Park, Great Cloud Island Township, Denmark Township, and Hastings. 30% of demand is expected to be generated outside of that primary market area, and that can include a number of different reasons: people relocating, people just deciding that they want to live in the area. Sometimes it's generated by a lot of new housing, or housing that people, are looking for. So demand is somewhat fluid between adjacent communities, and it may affect the realized demand over the period of time. So a little bit about population growth. So Cottage Grove experienced its greatest growth between 1960 and 1970 in terms of population, with a second growth spurt between 1990 and 2000. And this isn't unusual for a community such as Cottage Grove. So in terms of like when housing development started in the community and its trajectory over time. So I would say that some communities grow more rapidly than others, and some start their process sooner and then maybe take a pause and then start again. And I just want to comment so that since 2000, growth has been at a very steady but generally decelerating pace in terms of the rate of growth. So it's consistent with most other expanding metro area suburban cities, especially as those cities become more fully developed. And also, I want to comment that some of what we're seeing too is related to general demographic trends that we're seeing both in the metro area and across Minnesota, as well as also throughout the nation. So for sale home prices continue to climb. I don't think it's really a surprise to anyone that we do have a general housing shortage in a number of different areas. And this has occurred primarily since the 2000s. So we went through that period of a housing recession. And then what happened is we experienced during the recovery a period where we had declining housing mortgage rates and we had tremendous development occur. And that occurred primarily up until about just recently, actually. So mortgage interest rates started to rise. But what really happened too, even with that, despite the fact that we had mortgage interest rates rise, because of the housing shortage that we already had, then we continued to see home values rise, even though we've seen some declines in market activity. The days on market, that's continued to be very low. We do not have enough homes on the market in terms of being able to satisfy the demand and being able to have what we consider to be a balanced housing market. And that has continued to be the case for more than 5-6 years, where our months of supply has continued to be very, very low. So that increase in pricing, of course, has knocked out a number of entry-level buyers out of the market. Move-up buyers, since the higher mortgage interest rates, a lot of them are staying put and not moving up. And we were also relying on that move-up to be able to create more housing for that entry-level buyer. So we've really started to see some kind of a period of stagnancy in the housing market at this point because of this situation. New construction is also suppressed because of a slowdown in the demand, again, due to those higher mortgage interest rates. Land prices have not decreased, so we're having difficulties in terms of having developers being able to make numbers work and be able to buy land at an affordable rate. And then we also still have supply chain challenges. So a little bit about market rate rentals. So a lot of people who are priced out of the housing market often shift to rental properties. During the 1990s and 2000s, we had a dearth of new apartment construction in the Twin Cities metro area, but then new construction post the recession just increased dramatically. So we had a number of new rental units come into the market. We've also had, just even within the past 5 years, a lot of new rental construction. And that has helped, I would say, in terms of being able to satisfy some of the housing demand. What we're seeing now is, again, in this situation, too, we're seeing a lot of significant increases in rents, not only among new construction, but we're seeing existing rental housing also dramatically increase its rents. Of course, again, due to shortages. This has created, again, this has led to kind of an exacerbation of affordability in both, not only the for sale market, the rental market. So we're really kind of getting hit hard in terms of how we're trying to be able to satisfy housing demand among a number of different housing segments. So new multifamily construction has slowed due to higher mortgage interest rates. Again, demand does remain strong. I will tell you that we continue to work with a lot of private developers who are looking to try and put new housing into the market. They are struggling a little bit because of trying to balance the financial end of it with land prices and with construction costs. So some are we've seen a lot of public-private partnerships in trying to get new housing accomplished. We've also seen, of course, developers out there trying to increase their capital and equity because of lending, the mortgage interest rates and lending requirements. So there are those situations. I will also say that we are seeing developments move forward, so it's not all is lost yet. It's just more difficult. And I would say we're seeing the same type of thing. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but in terms of affordability, we're seeing the state step up in terms of a lot more housing dollars to try and assist new construction, affordable development. So I would say along with that rise in rents that we're seeing among market rate properties, that does also affect what we're seeing in terms of affordable rents. So the affordability, even though affordability is lower, those rents are also starting to creep up. And so there, what we're seeing too is we're starting to see households, even though new market rate development is at this level and affordable rents are at this level, we're still seeing households, I would say a number of households struggle to be able to even make that affordable rent at new affordable properties, most of which are developed through the tax credit program, the federal tax credit program. We are seeing some alternate types of things, so there is some bonding going on. There are some other niche financing programs that are being used to try and get rents at a more affordable level than just using the tax credit program. So, and again, I mentioned that. So and the tax credit funding resources are a highly competitive situation, not only in Minnesota, but elsewhere. And so developers sometimes try 2-3 times to be able to be awarded those tax credits before a project gets funded. The state of Minnesota did provide a significant amount of funding through a workforce funding program, and as I understand, they are looking at providing additional dollars through that same program. Unfortunately, there were so many projects that were trying to obtain that funding that there really wasn't enough dollars to go around. And there are some workforce housing developments, particularly in greater Minnesota, that are still kind of waiting for new funding. So this kind of focuses more on Cottage Grove in specific. So we did project demand for both owned housing, so detached and attached. And then there is strong demand again for market rate rental housing. There is a need for all housing products across the spectrum. I would say there's if we could just create a situation, I think, where we would provide affordable housing that didn't have significant income restrictions, then we would definitely see much higher demand for that type of product. So sometimes we call just generally market affordable housing, NOAH, or naturally occurring affordable housing. Most of the time, what that is in the market are older properties that have lower sale prices or lower rents. And they just are that way because of the fact that they're older, not because of the fact that they may be new and have affordable rents or affordable pricing. We are seeing some areas of the state that are trying some different, more innovative products. So like a housing cooperative that's for sale, just generally. So not targeted to seniors, although senior cooperatives have been very popular in the state. And then we are seeing some smaller lot size development, some development where it's modular based, which can get some of the pricing down. So we are seeing some options for products. Most of those are not being developed actually in the Twin Cities metro area. So senior housing demand, so there's demand for senior housing, and it's going to continue to increase over the next 20 years, thanks to a lot of us, baby boomers. I would say, though, that as we go along, originally, when we first started doing senior housing, I think that people had thought that everybody was just going to automatically move into senior housing. And so there was a sense of, oh, senior housing is kind of all the baby boomers, all the seniors, they're all just going to go to senior housing. Well, over time, we found that that isn't true. And the market has expanded and started to develop other types of housing products that continue to appeal to a very broad age group and different needs of seniors. So I think you're probably familiar with assisted living and memory care, and those two products are still recovering from a significant downturn during the pandemic for a lot of different reasons. One of those reasons, though, is that labor shortages continue to negatively affect their ability to satisfy demand in the service levels. So while there's been there was quite a bit of pullback in assisted living and memory care during the pandemic, we have started to see that demand come back. But because of labor shortages, we're still seeing a number of facilities not be able to serve the demand adequately because they can't find workers to be able to staff appropriately. So this graph does show demand by service level. So we looked both at shallow subsidy, which is what we call affordable senior, then deep subsidy or subsidized senior, memory care, assisted living, independent living, which is primarily, lots of times independent living is attached in a campus, so attached to independent with assisted living and memory care, so that there is a transition for people who may move in at an independent living stage, and they can transition if they need to. Some people never need to, but some people may need to transition to higher levels of care. And then we have what we call adult rental and then adult owner. We are seeing more, I think we are seeing more adult owner occupied types of products, even though the senior cooperative has been the most prevalent, especially in Minnesota. But we are starting to see more age 55 townhome developments, and as well as age 55 townhome rentals. So we are seeing those products in the market. The primary adult rental product has been kind of that 3-story apartment building. Although early on in the 80s, there were a number of affordable cottage-style developments that were put into the market that proved to be extremely popular, and they still are very, very popular. But we haven't seen a lot of that type of product come in new to the market. So I put this slide in kind of to just talk a little bit about some of the impacts and the factors that we're seeing that have led especially to, when I talk about entry level and middle market, I'm talking specifically about the for sale market. So a number of different things have impacted our ability to really provide affordable for sale housing. Zoning regulations, density requirements, design and material requirements, permits, impact fees, infrastructure costs, building code changes, increasing labor and material costs, land acquisition costs, financing challenges for smaller developers and builders. So I will say that unfortunately, during the recession, we lost a lot of our small builders during that period of time. Some have come back, but a lot of them have not. And the ones that have come back, they began to focus primarily on just luxury custom-built homes. Lenders, of course, have tightened underwriting standards. Developers are having to put higher equity into their developments. Bank regulation is also increasing with some recent bank failures. And of course, we need economies of scale. So we tend to see that we're needing larger size developments or many more homes to be able to make the numbers work. So some key takeaways: population and household growth was strong last decade. There has been increase in family households, but not enough to overshadow those without children and singles living alone. I will say, though, that Cottage Grove is a community where we have generally, in this past decade, seen a fairly strong increase in family households. So that is atypical of what we've seen in a lot of other communities, especially communities nearby, but also other communities in the Twin Cities metro area. Cottage Grove's near-term growth is primarily led by millennials and baby boomers. That's resulting in demand for housing products somewhat at the opposite ends of the spectrum, although there is some overlap in market rate rental housing and for-sale townhomes where you can satisfy kind of both of those groups with similar products. Growth in the 65-plus cohort will dominate in the next 15 to 20 years. What housing products are needed? So I say this in kind of tongue-in-cheek a little bit because about 20 years ago, I was having the same conversation with a number of my colleagues, most of whom were not only senior housing developers, but multi-housing developers, and they were all trying to figure out what the baby boomers were going to want in the next 15 to 20 years. And I don't know, we didn't have an answer then, and I don't know that we have a really good answer now. I will say that I think baby boomers have truthfully redefined the housing market in every single decade that they've passed through. And I think they will continue to do that as they age. For sale and rental housing will combine to increase the housing stock in Cottage Grove. As low-density land supply decreases, it will be important to target locations for higher density development. For senior housing, active adult products, rental and for sale will continue to be popular. High home prices enable seniors to sell and relocate to more convenient housing products. Between 2024 and 2030, demand is estimated for 1,910 for sale units, 933, that's all rental units. So that's market rate and affordable and subsidized, and then about 1,023 senior units, that's across all service levels. And that was it. Did I make it in 15 minutes? Maybe not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions from the commission? All right, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This time we'll move to item 8, which is approval of the minutes. There are no additions or corrections. I'd look for a motion to approve the meeting minutes from February 24th.
Motion to approve?
Motion to approve from Commissioner Stevens. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second from Commissioner Bott. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Vote carries 7-0. 9 is reports. 9A is recap of March 5th and March 19th City Council meetings with Emily presenting.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, going all the way back to March 5th. The only item that I'll mention on that agenda was the Graymont 3rd Edition Final Plat, Lennar's project down south of 100th Street. That is their third and final phase of that development, so 74 more lots will come online towards the end of this year. March 19th, 2 items that I wanted to mention. North Point and their outdoor storage was approved at the council table to move to, I'll call it building number 2 of that North Point, where they're expanding their space and expanding their outdoor storage area. And then finally, the council did have a workshop with a group called Yellow Tree, who is working on, we're calling it Outlot A of Everwood, so just behind Kohl's, there's a vacant lot there. Those folks are working on a multifamily project, market rate apartment project, and had a good conversation with council about the potential for some subsidy to support their project with such a unique site. There's some limitations to what they can do and how many units they can build. So they did get a favorable nod from the council, so they will move forward with putting together a formal plan set. So I anticipate in the next handful of months, we would see a planning application before you. And with that, of course, I will leave it to Mr. Councilmember Justin Olson if he has anything to add or questions from the commission.
I don't think I have anything to add, but I'll certainly entertain questions on anything that you may have heard this evening or heard through the proverbial grapevine. I know that the social media is usually pretty busy with all kinds of things that may or may not be true. So what can I help you with?
All right, thank you. Thank you to both of you. Any questions for Councilmember Olson? All right, thank you.
That makes me happy. Thank you.
No rumors to quash today. B is response to planning commission inquiries. We did have an inquiry from last meeting which talked about illumination on principal structures in commercial areas, I think specifically. We did get a memo from Sam on that topic. Any additional comment, concern from commission about that? Seeing none, we'll move on to planning commission requests for this meeting. Any requests for staff? It's in the packet. No, I don't think we got a separate email. I think it's just in the packet. Yeah. I don't see any requests, so we will move on to 10, which is the annual organization meeting, since this is the March meeting. A is the 2025 Planning Commission rules. Staff has requested that we table that for another meeting because there are some changes I think that they want to tweak on that. So if commission agrees, I'd look for a motion to table the 2025 Planning Commission rules till the next regular meeting.
I'll make a motion to table it to the April meeting.
All right, I have a motion to table from Commissioner Fisher to the April meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Britton. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries 7-0. Which leaves us with B, which is election of officers. We have two officers besides myself that serve on the commission. One is vice chair, who primarily, as well as being a leader on the commission, would take over chair duties if I were not present for the meeting. And then the other is secretary, which takes the role at the meeting, and I think in the event that both I and the vice chair are not here, takes the chair duties as well. And so right now, Commissioner Britton is our vice chair. Commissioner Rasmussen was our secretary. He is no longer on the commission. And so I would be looking, we'll start with vice chair. I'd be looking for any nominations from any member of the commission. You can nominate yourself. You can nominate somebody else to be vice chair for the next year. Any nominations?
It's always so awkward.
I know, right? They've yet to come up with a better way to do it, so.
I know, right? Well, I guess the question is if Mr. Britton wants to continue to be the vice chair or if he would like to be relinquished of his duties.
I would be happy to continue to serve as vice chair.
With that, do I have a nomination for any member of the commission?
What if someone else wants to do it?
Doesn't sound like anyone's raring to do it, but.
What's that? No, that's fine.
Then he's approved by unanimous consent.
Right.
Yeah, with no objection, then we'll make Commissioner Britton our vice chair for the next year.
Yay.
All right, how about secretary? Any
wouldn't mind.
nominations?
I wouldn't mind being secretary.
Okay, Commissioner Fisher, nominate herself. Anyone else would like to nominate themselves or somebody else for secretary? Seeing none, then, without objection, Commissioner Fisher will be our next secretary for the next year. All right, thank you both.
Yay.
For your
Congratulations.
willingness to serve again on top of normal. Which leaves us with 11, adjournment. I look for a motion to adjourn and then.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn from Commissioner Britton. Do I have a second?
I second.
Second from Commissioner Bott. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries 7-0. We are adjourned.